we, the Alliance, know Michele is because we're all part of the conference that Christina had this spring in Columbus, Ohio. Michele was a fantastic speaker, so we wanted her to come and share her knowledge here. So Michele received her PhD in counseling studies in 2014 and was certified in applied positive psychology in 2016. And she will complete Christina's academic Academy of Nutrition Recovery Coaching certification in October almost next
Level
month.
2, yeah, will be finished.
So Michele's career began in 1984 with a BS in veterinary technology, and she worked 5 years in veterinary cardiovascular research. Then she graduated with an MBA from Phoenix, Arizona, the School of American Graduate School. And she opened restaurants for a while. That was very,
Yeah.
and then she decided to change paths, and she did her addiction counseling in 2009, and she wrote a book in 2010, and then she did a PhD in 2014. And from there, I'll have her continue the rest of the story because it sounds very exciting.
Thank you, Dr. Madhava. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. The Alliance, I really appreciate the chance to present. I did have a varied background. I think that's the result of ADHD. So there's something new is always presenting itself. But I finally found a career that stuck. So I've been doing this one for 17 years. And what's great about it is it changes every day. And there is so much information I didn't know. And the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. And so I'm still in that section of getting a certifications after the PhD because it's a gift that keeps on giving, and it certainly satisfies the need for new things, novelty and variety, having ADHD. So yeah, so I'm happy to be here today. And if there aren't any questions, I'll just share my screen and start the whole thing up. Does that sound right? Does that sound right? Yes? Yeah, okay, thanks. Share my screen. All right, so today I'm going to talk about treatments for alcohol moderation, naltrexone, amino acids, and practical insights. And so everything that I do in my practice is targeted. And this happened in the last 8 years. And in the last year and a half, I started the amino acids. And the more that I'm paying attention, the more that I'm looking for solutions that work and work quickly, the more I'm seeing that reflected in my practice. After 17 years in clinical work and in agency work, the work I was doing, the company merged, and since then I've been on my own for a year and a half. I was always doing coaching on the side, but now I do it full time. And so it's allowing me to really go beyond some of the scope of my earlier work, and also to affect change much more quickly with my clients. And I've chosen to niche as a moderation coach, teaching people how to control their drinking without quitting. Because in the 8 years that I ran a program with over 500 people that went through it, I learned that even if you have severe use disorder, you can learn to control it, but it takes a specific targeted philosophy in many different areas, not just one. So I'd like to cover all of those areas today. And to that end, I'm going to start the presentation. So today, I'd like to talk about the different treatments that I work with in my practice, from pharmaceutical, nutritional, behavioral, emotional, processional, and then when we're done, we're going to do discussional because it's all ending with AL. Just to be fun, when I was writing the presentation, I had a sense of humor that night, so that's my sense of humor, so we're going to go with that. Anyway, so first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about alternative medicine, because what I do is outside of the field of sobriety, and one size fits all thinking, black and white. The only cure for alcoholism is quit completely. So I'm outside of that. So it's a little bit alternative, as is the amino acid therapy and other methods that I use. So the first one that I came in contact with 8 years ago was something called targeted naltrexone, or the Sinclair method. I was not taught that despite oodles of education. So target naltrexone is a medication that was developed in 1963. It was researched more and put out on the market. They found it to be useless for most things, so they let it sit on the shelf. And then in 1984, they started doing research on it, but it didn't affect heroin use like methadone. Furthermore, it was a full-on antagonist and not a partial agonist. And so there was no money to be made from it. So there it sat for the longest time until Dr. David Sinclair started to do research on it and discover that used in a targeted way, it was extremely effective. In fact, 86% of clients experienced no side effects and found improvements in their drinking because they lost interest. And it's 78% effective, and it works for most clients most of the time. So it's a full-on opioid receptor antagonist, so it fills the receptor completely. It's not addictive, so once it works, it works. It does not produce euphoric effects, but it doesn't completely annihilate them. Clients report pleasurable experience, but not the over-the-top rewarding effect of just drinking without naltrexone. So while drinking remains enjoyable, clients lose interest, and it occupies endorphin receptors. So the protocol for the Sinclair method is that the medication is to be taken 60 to 90 minutes before drinking as usual, and don't take it on the alcohol-free days that you have. Daily drinkers will take it every day until they start having alcohol-free days, and then they'll be able to skip on the days. So there's a way to accelerate that as well. That's little known, but I use it with all of my clients, which is very helpful. So Sinclair believed that drinking alcohol was a learned behavior based in operant conditioning like Pavlov's dog. We think about drinking, we salivate, we start craving, and then we go for it. So he used the Sinclair method, or naltrexone, for pharmacological extinction, although some researchers support that it's more psychological extinction. Whichever way you want to look at it, it still works and it's very effective. However, it's not a solution for all clients that suffer from alcohol use disorder. About 15 to 35% of people have a poor tolerance for it. They'll get headaches, they'll get sleepy, they'll have like a morning after sort of hangover, even though they haven't had much to drink. And so other people feel like they have just a really terrible flu, and they don't like to use it, so they won't be compliant. And who would be if it would make you so sick? So anyway, to put a picture on it, I have a little diagram here about what's different and how alcohol works in the body and what naltrexone does. So if we look at the top left corner, unassuming person takes a drink of alcohol, and suddenly it stimulates the beta endorphins. And once those endorphins are released, it activates the opioid receptors. GABA is inhibited. Dopamine is disinhibited, so it's set free, if you will, and it rises in the nucleus accumbens. So at that point, it reinforces the positive feeling that we get. We get euphoria, and it reinforces the continued use of alcohol. So we end up, as the guy looks happy and toasting, and looking for the next time he's going to get drunk. On the other hand, if you take that unassuming drink, your beta endorphins get stimulated. Naltrexone comes in almost like a police officer and puts a stop to that. It blocks the mu opioid receptors. GABA stays activated, and therefore it inhibits the dopamine or reduces it in the nucleus accumbens. And then GABA inhibits the opioid and endorphins. So there's less reinforcement. You don't feel calm. You don't feel the excitement and the energy from the dopamine. And because it's not reinforced, there's a reduction in cravings and use. And the interesting thing about it, in some ways it mimics the reward deficiency syndrome, but it's reversible and temporary. And since naltrexone is believed to metabolize off receptors between 4 and 8 hours, we sort of go with 6 for redosing. So if someone has a longer day where they're going to drink, say a wedding reception where they're part of the wedding party, they're going to start drinking earlier in the day. And so what we suggest is with 6 hours later or so, depending on on your results from using it, that you would redose to go into the evening festivities. So that's kind of my little happy endorphin stimulation there. And that's the difference, the way it's acting in the brain. And so for those people it doesn't work for, that 15 to 35%, there are some other options. There's targeted microdosed ondansetron, and that's dosed at 0.5 milligrams twice a day, the pediatric drops on days with alcohol use. And it's estimated about 35% of clients have some biogenetic endophenotype in the serotonin transporter world, so it's not working the same way. But the way that ondansetron is thought to work is that it ameliorates underlying serotonergic abnormality that they have with the selective 5-HT receptors. So it sort of mediates alcohol's important and salient effects that keep people coming back again and again. So I've had a client that could not use naltrexone, and she did, at my encouragement to talk to her doctor about ondansetron, she did finally get the pediatric drops, and it made a huge difference. She was able to stop drinking, which was her goal, in 10 days. She was very diligent about it. She was taking her amino acids. She was drinking mindfully, and she planned the week, and she was able to do it and remained abstinent for almost 3 months. And then her daughter had a suicide attempt, which sort of put her over the edge. But today she's sober and doing quite well. Another medication that a person can take that can also be very effective, I found out serendipitously because I had a client who wanted to lose weight and decided to go on GLP-1s for that. And she didn't have a lot to lose. She didn't really meet criteria for weight loss, but she wanted to lose 20 pounds. So she convinced her doctor to put her on a very low dose. So she went on 0.25 milligrams a week, and she started to lose weight. But not only that, she was significantly averse to using alcohol. Even the thought of it was just not even good. So I later looked up to see what was going on with that. And sure enough, the dose can vary for alcohol use disorder up to, they start at 0.25 and they move it up a little bit up until about 1 milligram per week, or anything between that works to extinguish that desire and that seeking and craving for alcohol. So it's thought it's shown to decrease alcohol intake, reduce motivation for alcohol, I saw that firsthand, and then prevent relapse by drinking. Alcohol withdrawal is also attenuated, so you don't have as significant a response, but the mechanism is thought to regulate the alcoholic behaviors, but it's not fully defined yet. And then they believe it does act in the reward center of the brain, but also they're still researching that to know exactly how the GLP-1s are working. But I've seen it have a dramatic effect on my client as well. But when she lost all her weight, and this is a big but, when she lost the weight she wanted to lose, she came off the medication and her desire to drink returned. So we need to do more research on what this is about. So moving right through that into the nutritional look, we're looking at, and with the academy that I learned, and at the conference even more, getting into nutrition and dietary supplements, which would be the aminos, are really important. Going even further into that is gut health, and the microbiota neurotransmitters are very important. Your gut bacteria communicate directly with your brain, and they work together to help the body work in just a myriad of different ways. It's really much more important than we've been led to believe before, and certainly in any of my education. So the overarching concept here is that the microbiota, your gut bacteria, co-evolved with humans and animals to help perform neuronal functions. So they're active in the nervous system in very many ways. They communicate with the central nervous system through bile, short-chain fatty acids, glutamate, GABA, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine. So there is a very prolific language that the gut bacteria speak to your brain with. And your brain also speaks back to the gut bacteria through the gut-brain axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And the main highway is the vagus nerve through afferent and efferent fibers, which go to different organs and also the brain. So the microbiome use different neurotransmitters that your body produces and they produce, which are excitatory, inhibitory, neuromodulators, and neurohormones, including oxytocin and vasopressin. I had no idea how important and how talkative these microbiome are with your brain. So the way it works, there are more afferent fibers going upstream to the brain, about 90%, including the production of serotonin and in the gut, and also acetylcholine, and they also um, talk to the other organs that way as well, using these fibers that run up and down. And then the efferent fibers bring messages, as I understand it, down to the rest of the body. So it's the super highway. I was taught that the vagus nerve, if you stimulate it, slows your heart rate. That it wasn't that. Otherwise, very important. So there's a lot to learn in human medicine. And I think a lot more of this should be included in training for people who are going to work in this field, as opposed to having to seek it out on your own. So just to show you how important the gut microbiome is, because that's why nutrition is so important, and that's why the amino acids are so important. Because if your gut bacteria don't feel good, you don't feel good. It's that closely connected. So how do we affect the microbiome? We do that through diet, nutrition. So in the academy, we talk about the 5-star diet, which is a nice, well-balanced look at food, including about 50% of total body weight in grams in protein, fats about 45 to 60 grams, depending on being male or female, depending on hormonal needs, depending on your size and activity and your energy needs, complex carbohydrates between 200 and 300. Now, if you're a bodybuilder, it's going to be a little different than if you're more sedentary and don't get a lot of exercise. And then, of course, because of our depleted food resources in the world today, even organic isn't as vitamin rich as it used to be. So cofactors such as multivitamins, minerals, omega-3s, amino acids can be very important. Another diet that has come up on the front with SUD is the keto diet. And so in that diet, the protein that's recommended, about 80 to 100% of your ideal body weight in grams of protein daily, which if you're not used to eating that much, you have to work up to over the course of a few weeks or months even. The fats are much higher, and that's to stimulate your ketone production so that you're running on ketones rather than carbohydrates and sugar or glucose. And then the complex carbohydrates are very low. You need some for good brain function, and you need some to feed your microbiome. But if you're primarily burning ketones, you can be very efficient, because once your body starts to burn the ketones, it also burns fat more readily. And so it can help you lose weight, but it can also reduce a lot of the glucose-related symptoms of withdrawal that people get when they're sugar burners, if you will. So cofactors, multivitamins, omega-3s, aminos are also very important in the ketogenic diet. So the good things about it when it comes to SUD are the ketogenic diet compensates for the glucose metabolism disorders caused by the withdrawal that you get. Increasing ketones helps to reduce withdrawal. And there's some good studies out on it already indicating a therapeutic usefulness, especially those inpatient days, that first 30 days. It can be very much a game changer and help clients feel a lot better. So the positive role it plays would be to in the reduction of sugar intake. That can help cravings overall. That can help water retention and release. That can help sleep. That can help a whole lot of things. Alteration of metabolic processes, improvement of neural circuitry associated with SUD, improvement of glial cell activation, and modulation of the gut microbacteria. If you're not feeding your so-called bad bacteria more sugar and carbs, then the good bacteria have a chance to thrive, which can reinforce all the messaging going upstream to your brain. I did notice, because I worked a substantial amount of my career in inpatient treatment, and one of the things that I noticed early on before any of this, that I knew any of this, was how much sugar, I worked in a men's unit, how much sugar they would consume. They would get a cup of coffee, fill it with sugar, and pour coffee over that. So it was mostly sugar. Often they would request donuts for breakfast, or Pop-Tarts, or lots of sugary desserts would disappear quickly. And I was like, there must be a connection. There must be a connection. And years later now, yes, there is a connection between diet and wellness. Go figure that out. Anyway, I love this slide because it just is a brief mention that two French guys found the first amino acids, discovered them over 220 years ago. And when I found out about the amino acid therapy, I was amazed to find out that I had not been taught about this. And after, 17 years in the field, this was completely known to me. And I think it's just unconscionable that we aren't trained in this, that this kind of conversation is outside the scope of normal everyday SUD counseling. It's just, it's beyond me. Just shocked. It shouldn't be that way. So these two men began a long 200-year history of discovery and application. And so through the hard work of Julia Ross and many others, we discovered which amino acids can be targeted towards which symptoms that we have in terms of depleted neurotransmitters. So we know about the 5-HTP and L-tryptophan, when to use them, when is best, L-glutamine, how that helps the gut microbiota as well, DLPA for pain, emotional pain or physical, L-theanine and GABA for calming things and managing stress and anxiety, of which I took a few of those before the presentation today, and L-tyrosine to help restore dopamine, which is poorly depleted on many of the clients that I have worked with. If I could go back and do amino acid therapy in the inpatient setting, it would have been so profoundly impactful for these young men that I worked with. I wish I would have known sooner. Anyway, today, the conventional medicine likes to give us prescription medications. They're not particularly concerned with side effects. Sometimes they are, but I feel often there's a ticking time bomb in the background that long-term use of medications that are untested for long-term use the outcomes aren't necessarily fantastic. And so I have my two French amis Amino who talk about having no side effects. And I guess this was the mood I was in to have my two French amino baguette friends, even though they're carbs. So the way that we treat symptoms and find out what symptoms people are having is to use the amino acid therapy chart, which is very useful. Clients take the first column and on a scale of 1 to 10, rate how significant their symptoms are. The ones that are 5 or above are the ones that I usually pay most attention to, and then add the total score, and the scores that are highest would be the place that I start with clients, depending on severity and frequency of their symptoms. And so in my practice, it's a look at the two most primary tools that I have, which is the targeted amino acid and nutritional therapy. Are they eating enough protein is usually the first question I ask now. And then what other things are they eating during the day? Typically, they're not eating enough protein. They're not drinking enough water. They don't take a multivitamin. They don't take omega-3. So there are some really basic things to start with: vitamin C, B3, niacin, for instance. And then evaluating if they are a candidate, or do they want to use naltrexone or ondansetron if needed. And so not everyone in my practice takes the naltrexone. About 65% are able to incorporate the skills and the rules and want to try that with the amino acids and the targeted nutrition before starting naltrexone. And many of them don't start naltrexone. So it's not a must, but for those who just can't get over the hump, and we know that relatively quickly, because we'll see changes within a week or two, and then we'll know if they're getting it within a month or two, 6 to 8 weeks or so. Since I see clients once a week, I do encourage them, if they're not seeing results, to contact me as soon as possible, and we can, adjust things as needed. But if they go 6, 8 weeks and they aren't getting alcohol under control, or we're seeing some reduction, then we'll look at what's going on, and I will recommend that they see their doctor for naltrexone. And then we'll follow through with the Sinclair method. And so whether someone is a daily drinker, on benders, bingers, or just a problem drinker because they come to the door with every different level of drinking. What I find is if they go on targeted naltrexone, daily drinkers start to have alcohol-free days if they put in place the rules that I asked, the 3 cardinal rules that I asked my clients to take. And they will have alcohol-free days. And as soon as they have alcohol-free days, then on the second day of drinking, their results with naltrexone could be better. I see more profound changes with the targeted naltrexone after 2 days of abstinence, and then they drink, say they take a Wednesday, Thursday off, and then they'll drink on Friday. They'll have even better results with the naltrexone. So once we get a couple of alcohol-free days glued together, I see a faster progression in their reduction of the numbers. And I have people report to me their weekly numbers, not their daily numbers. They track daily, but they report weekly because I think it's a better quantitative understanding of how big the problem is. Oftentimes I see clients talk about, I only had this many a day or that many a day, 5 a day or 6 a day. And now we're talking, 5 drinks a day adds up to 35 drinks a week or more. Typically there's more on the weekends. And when you look at it that way, it becomes, the equivalent of 7 bottles of wine. Well, that's kind of a lot. So to get people to quantify in larger batches is very helpful. Anyway, along with the nutrition and the targeted naltrexone and the amino acid therapy is behavioral targeting. And so what I do with clients is to target my 3 golden rules, and these can go a really long way. And when I poll my clients anecdotally, they say a game changer for them was the planning, the insistence on planning, because it eliminated the chaotic, unexpected binging that people do when they don't plan. So tracking weekly is standard in the field of TSM. Number of drinks you have, and rather than counting the number of days sober, we count the number of drinks we have per day. Add them up at the end of the week and have a conversation with your coach. And secondly is planning weekly, and that is not standard. Many people just say, you feel like drinking, take your pill and drink. And while that can be effective, it's a lot more slow than if someone has a premeditated, on purpose, targeted drinking day. So I ask people to plan when, where, what, how many, and with whom, so that they go into their week knowing which days they can expect to drink, how much they're planning to drink, and who they're drinking with, because if they're drinking with a heavy drinker, it may influence them differently than if they're the only person drinking or just having a glass of wine with their spouse. So choice versus unexpected chaos. And I always use the adage, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And when we drink when we feel like drinking, which is when most alcoholics will drink, feelings aren't a thing because they're very potent yes makers. It will always be yes if I feel like drinking. And let her rip was not a plan, like I'm going to take my pill and just start. And if you don't have an end point and you have no planning or forethought, then you're going to overdrink, especially in the beginning. So if you go in it a little more mindfully, saying, okay, I can go without drinking on Tuesday because I'm going to meet with friends on Wednesday, or I'll take Thursday and Friday off because I have a wedding on Saturday. Then you're starting to think ahead, you're starting to be on purpose, and that's planting a new seed for new behavioral developments. So planning is extremely important, I think often overlooked, because feelings, everyone will drink because they feel like it, and that's not a good reason to drink. I always ask people to ask themselves, is this a good reason to drink? Is it my birthday? Are we going out? Is it a special occasion? Are we having a backyard barbecue? Is this an appropriate place to drink? And then when they have a big event, when they're drinking intentionally versus unintentionally, when I feel like it, I ask people to visualize the event. Like if it's a wedding, I'll ask for the itinerary and we'll walk through the wedding. If it's a weekend wedding at a winery, which I did have a client go through, his son's wedding, we walked through the complete itinerary. And after his 3-day event, he came back to our individual session and he said it went better than expected. His wife had a wonderful time. He remembered to be romantic. He didn't overdrink. He had beautiful toasts. He made memories and pictures. When before that rehearsal, the visual rehearsal of the wedding, he was very worried that he would lose control and make a fool of himself and disappoint his son, which he very much didn't want to do. So part of that is teaching new and simple skills. There are many, many delay tactics and behavioral ideas like delaying your drinking, setting a curfew, having a drinking window. I'm going to drink from 8 to 10 or 6 to 7 or 6 to 8 or something like that. Diluting your drinking, making spritzers and putting ice in your drinks, or short shotting your drinks so that you're not drinking as much volume. Having a wingman, someone who you've given permission to make a comment. Eat more protein before you go out. Use a measured wine glass. Weight Watchers has a really nice one people like to use. Make your own rules about daytime drinking or not starting before 4 or 5. People say, well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Yep, but not here, right? So staying in your time zone. Sometimes don't drink alone. People who drink alone at home, when they get rid of the alcohol at home and they're not allowing themselves to drink at home and they're only drinking out in social events, sometimes that's the antidote for them. Other people drink in bed, so stop drinking in bed might be the antidote to reduce your drinking, or change up the glass, your favorite glass in your favorite chair in your favorite corner of the room, in your favorite program. You're just so distracted from what you're drinking, it becomes an unconscious task rather than being conscious. So changing it up, new and different, helps for our senses to detect things that we've otherwise not paid attention to. So I reinforce what's working, and I explore, I encourage them to explore other things to do and other ways that work for them. And instead of thinking black and white, I try to get people thinking and, from or and or to and thinking. So let's do this and add this in, or let's do this and take the one thing out, because too much change all at once creates that resistance and that rebound use, if you will. So also, in addition to those behavioral things, we have, targeted inquiry or paradigm shifting with clients. And I like to say it's the elephant principle. There's so much psychologically and emotionally and childhood trauma and everything that to turn that around is going to be done little by little. And one of the first and most powerful things is talking about the starving brain. So shifting them from thinking, I'm a failure, I'm terrible, I'm fundamentally flawed, introducing the notion that what's happening is you have a starving brain, and that needs to be restored, and you're going to have much more effectiveness in your own life, in decision making, and in controlling what's happening. And so the other heretical idea that I have that isn't well accepted by abstinence-based communities, and that is that drinking is not the problem. And I feel earnest about that. Over drinking is the problem. A glass or two of wine from time to time, even once a week, is not going to ruin your life. What happens is the over drinking, the high volume, high frequency drinking that leads to problematic use. And many people, I would say all my clients, come to me saying, I don't want to drink as much anymore. I just want to be able to have 1 or 2 with friends once in a while and not just think about it all day and all night and drink every day. And it's just getting out of hand. And then figuring out what's causing that getting out of hand thing, besides just the body's response, but the mind's response. So shame, guilt, and failure serve no purpose. It just keeps us locked in the cycle and the use. And in moderation, with targeted moderation, what I talk about with clients is the difference between the one big decision, I'm giving up alcohol forever and ever, and I can never touch it again, and it's too big, and I'm stressed, and I get the deprivation effect if I go too long, into a smaller proposition where, how about let's just start looking at reducing that. We'll do some things to help you feel better, help your gut work better, help your mind work better, and give you back some control so that you can start to see some changes. And then the buy-in is pretty easy when they start feeling like they're getting back control, which happens relatively quickly. I'm amazed at how quickly for some. So rather than quitting and making this big commitment, we talk about learning as we go. It's more of a gray area. Although choosing how much you drink, I think, is really important, knowing the high end of what's acceptable. 5 or more is a binge, 4 or more for women. So it's a choice thing rather than an all or nothing, rather than, I'm not going to drink anything at all versus I'm going to drink everything that's in the house. It's just too extreme. So we bring it back into that moderate thinking, not just moderate drinking. And then we look at drinking through 2 parameters, frequency versus volume. And so sometimes people are drinking every day, and if we start, and they're high volume, high frequency, high volume, you can't start skipping days, you're not going to feel good. So we start by reducing volume to start with, depending on where they start from. It indicates how much you can take away per week. And then once you get down into the 2 or 3 a day, then you can start taking alcohol-free days without the kind of consequences or withdrawal that you'd feel if you try to take 2 days off when you're drinking 27 drinks. And, I've seen that happen as well. So, and then target the growth mindset. I think that's really important because a lot of heavy drinkers have a fixed mindset. It's always this way. It's always going to be this way. Something's wrong with me. My family hates me. I hate my job. Like all these things where they get fixed, like they're in a rut. So I like to give them what a friend of mine termed the sticky ideas. And so one of them help bring in a little bit of joy and levity because everything can be so darn serious is to talk about naltrexone as a condom for the brain. And you mustn't have unprotected drinking, which elicits a chuckle from most of my clients and helps them remember that they don't want to have unprotected drinking if they're using naltrexone. To choose appropriate drinking to set and setting and being aware of how much other people are drinking around you. Often when people refrain from drinking and they just spend one evening observing the drinking of others at some event, some social thing, they get a really good wake-up call that not everyone is drinking 8 drinks at dinner, they're drinking 1 or 2. And when my clients are drinking those 8 drinks, they're not realizing what everyone else is doing. So just that little bit of observation can go a long way. Also, peak end experiences, helping them when they choose to not drink as much, they feel bored and what's the point because they like to drink on a mission. It's to help them find what would make that evening, if you drink less and very well, what would make you happy in the morning that you did. And so when we can identify, oh, I don't have a hangover this morning, or I said I would drink 3 and I drank 3, or I said I would drink 3 and I drank 4, but that's still a lot less than I would have drank had we not talked about it. And in the morning, I didn't have a hangover. Those sorts of things. I didn't have the argument with my spouse. I didn't show up late for work. Those sort of things, which are peak experiences. And then a lot of people say, well, I'm just a social drinker, but it gets out of hand. Once I start having one, then I'm going to have as many as I want. And so I always remind them that the point of social drinking is the first word and not the second word. And social means conversation. It means maybe building memories. It means connecting with other people on a personal level and not just being there to drink with the goal of it to be on a mission to get intoxicated. And then adding to that often through the AA research that many people with SUD also have ADHD. About 25% of adults are to have it, but they also say that it's 50 to 60% for children. So a lot of these children grow up and they are exposed to drug use. So I'd say that ADHD is maybe higher in the SUD population. And also people with ADHD have a higher incidence, about 50% of having SUD. So to that end, providing novelty and variety is a really important part of one's life if you have that, because ADHD can be a problem or it can be a blessing. And I think it's a double-edged sword, and you have to focus on the good parts of it and manage the parts that aren't so good. And so incorporating novelty and variety into their actions are really important. And so through that, I expand ideas, because so many clients will go, well, if I can't drink, I'm just going to have ice water. And so it's like, really, ho hum, poor me. I'm going to sit in the corner and drink ice water all night. And that's kind of that resentment. I can't drink, everyone else can. And it just doesn't lead to anything positive. So I encourage people to look at everything between alcohol and water, which includes anything from lemonade, kombucha, to near beers or mocktails or ginger beer or a concoction of tinctures. There's so many now shrubs and things that are non-alcoholic that can be made into very interesting drinks. There are even kombuchas that have savory flavors rather than just sweet flavors. And introducing them to the whole range of drinks means that they can go to a party and bring maybe a few cans of Recess with them, which is an herbal concoction that's carbonated that can with ashwagandha in it, so it causes some relaxation, and there's L-theanine in it too, I think. And so that's something that's a go-to for some people. So just introducing that there's other things to drink in this world, not just water, and and beer. And I'm surprised at the number of people who have nothing. They're black and white when it comes to drinking something. There's like, how about 7-Up? No, hot ice water. Okay. um, and then last but not least, changing recovery vocabulary. And I've noticed in all the groups that I did for 8 years that the vocabulary was, people were hypersensitive to vocabulary around drinking, because relapse and day counting and sober days and what went wrong, let's do that autopsy after relapse. And, autopsy is done after death, so it's a bad thing. And I didn't realize I didn't know I was going to drink. I just suddenly felt like it. And I just got out. Like, it's always a big surprise about why somebody relapses, even though a counselor might see it coming, 3 weeks in advance. And then also it puts this idea into the brain of limits. And there's nothing less that alcoholics like is that to have limits. Like, and that's part of the mantra. Like, they don't want limits. And so it's important to change those words around that would be more inspiring and more palatable for them. And so rather than a relapse, it's an over drinking event. And what did we learn from it? Rather than counting the days, we just track the drinks and have a drink count rather than a day count. And instead of sober days, we call them, sobriety is relative. We have alcohol-free days. So, or some people call them, days on drinking or off drinking. And instead of looking at what went wrong when I had the over drinking event, I look at what went right. And frequently I compare this year's birthday to last year's birthday. They forget how far they've come. And I constantly have to remind clients how far they've come. And if it were before the program, what would you have done? And comparing like that so that they know they've made progress and it's tangible. And then in the groups setting that I have, one group I do a week, and in that group setting, everyone is very quick to say, oh, remember this, I saw this, I've seen change. So they really reinforce positivity rather than what went wrong or shame or blame or you can do better next time. I always ask, what would you do next time? And then instead of surprise relapse, going off the train and causing some mayhem or arguments or chaos or unintended damage or injury to somebody, I have them plan. And planning is so instrumental because they need to drink intentionally and on purpose or premeditated, if you will. And when they do that, they're taking control of alcohol. Alcohol's not taking control of them. It flips the script so that they're able to at least begin that behavior and that way of thinking. And over time, you do see it take root and make as big a change as the other things we're doing. And I never give them limits on their drinking. I give them goals. So prior to the next week, we check in for how we did. And then going into the next week, we say, what are the goals for next week? What's coming up on your schedule? So Wednesday, I've got a, after work thing. And Friday, I've got dinner out. And Wednesday, we have a, party to go to or something. And okay, how are you going to manage that? And then they say, well, I'll do this. I think I'll do that. And so my total for the week will be 10 or 12 or 8 or 6 or whatever. Or I'm going to drink between 4 and 6 this week. And once they set goals, they're striving to reach goals rather than setting limits where they have to go and bump their head up against that. It makes a huge difference. Language is important, I think. And we have punitive language in the field of recovery. And I think part of that's the problem. I think we need to change the way we speak about it. And of course, it goes well with the moderation thing. So solutions. Those are some of the solutions that I've found in my work. I'd like to hear from you. If you have any client experiences or comments, questions, additions or feedback, and weather reports, travel plans, or what you can have for dinner, I don't care. So I'll open that up.
Yeah, thank you, Michele. That was fantastic. That was
Oh,
really,
thank you.
yeah, I really like that. I think, we in general try to emphasize, abstinence as a goal, but I think not everyone can achieve abstinence. I think
Or want it. Yeah.
Individual. And so I think it's good to have a variety of options for everyone, for many people, I think what you're proposing. And I think there's a lot of structure around what you do. It's not like take naltrexone and see you later, which is what we do in conventional medicine, right? We just give them the naltrexone and there's no real follow-up, I would say. The follow-up would be like, how are you doing with the naltrexone? But it sounds like the description you gave of the program that you're running is excellent. You have structure throughout from the beginning and at the end, like how did you do? And, with that event that you mentioned, with the wedding event. So that's really fantastic. I think it's what you're doing is great. I'm just going
Oh,
to open it
thanks.
for other questions.
Sure.
This is
Hi,
Julia.
Oh,
Hi,
Hi, how
Michelle.
are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you and hear you again. This time I didn't have to interrupt you and say, would you please slow down so I can take notes?
I took your advice to heart.
Great. Well, I have quite a few questions, but the main, well, let's start at the top. You started with the gut, I start with the brain. And I'm wondering if you're acquainted with the book Alcohol and the Addictive Brain by Kenneth Blum.
No.
Oh, I think you would find it extremely valuable. See, your training was post the blackout of information about neurotransmitter function in the brain. So in the 70s and in the 80s, there's a huge outpouring of research as we began to understand the new science, of neuroscience, what was really going on in the brain and how it was producing neurotransmitters and the levels of neurotransmitters, how they interacted and balanced each other, and what nutrients were required to keep the neurotransmitters fully functional. And the author, Kenneth Blum, is the only neuroscientist to have actually done research on addiction, alcohol, drug, and food addiction, and amino acid therapy. And he wrote the book, but prior to writing the book, he had done extraordinary and very highly praised research on the genetics of dopamine production and types of alcoholism. So the mild type versus the extreme loss of control type. Anyway, I think you'd find it really interesting, and like so many people who have been educated more recently about neurotransmitter function, there's a lot of emphasis on the gut, and what I call a blackout on the actual function in the brain of serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, and adrenaline in particular, plus the blood sugar function in the brain, or availability.
That should be standard operating information. I'm just like horrified that I wasn't taught that when I got my training, even in the PhD program.
I'm working on it. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it's called the dopamine hoax. And it's the substitution of a myth that dopamine is really the source of all reward.
And endorphins and GABA play a huge part. I had a dance with ChatGPT for several days. It was tutoring me. I asked it to give me medical school quality information, and we had a back and forth on it. And I was amazed. I was like, best kept secret, and also disappointed. I don't want to pay all the money for the education I got. It wasn't that good.
Right. Well, so I'm urging you to fight this blackout, this dopamine hoax that's being perpetrated. Just last week, after, 5 to 7 years of a lot more excitement about dopamine, it become the in word, finally, we know what all this is about. The medications that have been designed to supposedly enhance dopamine function are about to come on the market. And so now we know all of the companies that make pharmaceuticals for mood learned what they learned from the same neuroscience that Kenneth Blum and other neuroscientists who weren't involved in the pharmaceutical industry learned from. And so they know that the aminos are incredibly potent. And the less we know about the aminos and their connection, their immediate enhancement of, the 4 neurotransmitters that are so key, the better as far as they're concerned. So with that in mind, that's more like a comment than a question, but I'm really interested in what's happened as you've learned about the amino acids over this year, and how you have integrated them, because you sort of went over that, it wasn't entirely clear, what percentage, how many people have you seen that you've integrated the aminos into, and what has been your experience in combining it, what time of day, in terms of aminos and naltrexone taking, for example, but versus people who you start on the aminos, you talk about 8 weeks, we're finished in 8 weeks. We've got all zeros on the amino acid therapy chart in 8 weeks. So we expect in the first, 2 or 3 weeks to get massive changes in cravings. And so that was the other thing, is what your expectation is for amino acid therapy results.
Michelle,
Yeah.
before you answer, I just wanted to welcome everyone to next month's presentation. Jeff Jones, who's in the audience, is going to talk about whole family recovery. So please join us next month. All right, go ahead, Michelle. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So in the last year, I would have to say I put, at Christina's encouragement, talking about amino acids with all of my clients, which I usually carry 15 people typically a month. Not new, but some are tapering off and some are starting. So there's usually a roster of about 15 coming and going and in between. And all the people since joining the Academy I've had the conversation, and they've been willing to try the amino acids. And I would have to say that they kind of put naltrexone out of business. More people get better results with the aminos. And within a day or two, like they'll call me by the end of the week and like, I didn't have cravings. I didn't drink near as much. I only had one day that I drank. Like, really profound changes. And then naltrexone, as touted as it is, it's very useful as well. But I think the problem with naltrexone is, like Dr. Valsa said, she said, we give them the naltrexone and say, good luck with that, and off they go. And so I think staying with them and giving that constant reassurance and that constant input and the constant back and forth is really super helpful. So all of my clients. And when it comes to clients with naltrexone, what I do with that is they typically will drink in the evening. Usually their witching hours about 4 or 4:30 in the day. Sure. And so I have them take primarily most of their aminos in the morning or up to mid-afternoon. Like if they're going to take the aminos for endorphins and dopamine and GABA, so that they get most aminos in at that time of day. And then in the evening, they tend to drink. And so if it's a drinking night, they aren't necessarily having to take their tryptophan. If they want to take it, they can. But most people do, which is fine. Doesn't seem to be affected quite as much. They'll get a better night's sleep and feel more rested and refreshed. But so rather than taking the aminos at the same time they're taking naltrexone, I'll have them take it earlier. And then if it's true that naltrexone is pretty much out of the system, 6 to 8 hours, they've probably slept all night and gotten up later. So now they've kind of got another fresh start. So they'll have their aminos in the morning. And I'm finding it's working. Rather than seeing results in 3 months or 4 months, I'm seeing results in the first month, and frequently in the first week if they're at the right dose. I'll check more frequently as to where they're at. I'm more diligent about that since the conference to ask where they're at and how fast. And the more I check and the more we adjust, faster the results are. So that it's weeks and not, or days and weeks rather than months or years to get control of this.
Let me just comment on one thing and get clarity. Why don't you give them aminos before they go out to drink?
Just because the naltrexone is an antagonist and will fill the opioid receptors. So they're a hit.
So what time do they take the naltrexone?
Typically an hour before they drink. Most people drink between 5 and 7 p.m. So their aminos are more daytime use in the morning, mid-morning, lunchtime, mid-afternoon. And so that's where most of the doses are. Yeah, Mitchell.
Yeah, Mitchell. Michelle, you're really articulate, you're educated. In spite of being educated, you're still inquisitive. And I think you would be an excellent person to be at least on our board of advisors, if not on our board of directors. And I'd like you to consider that if you would.
Oh, sure.
And
That entails.
well, it entails doing more work for it than I do, but I'm on the board and I'm getting away with doing minimal things. But you have so much more to offer than I have.
Oh,
So
gee,
I'm going to have to hop off. I've got a meeting. That's why I interjected. But I'd really appreciate it if you would consider.
I'll consider it.
All
Thank you.
right. I mean, you could do more presentations. You could do it in our name as well, if that helps with your credibility.
Okay.
And basically, we're wide open to anything that you would want to do. I just think you've got the recipe of the person that I, as a board member, am looking for.
Oh, good.
So if you talk to Valsa, I have tremendous respect for her and for Salvatore. They're You could take all the knowledge I have and put it in one pinky of any one of those three, and you would be well served to hang out with them on the board and help develop things and so forth. I'll just be back in the background helping to support. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to seeing you as soon as you join.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was a,
That's cool. Yay.
yeah. So I welcome anyone in the audience to actually become a member. If you're not already a member of the Alliance, we could really use your support. So we'll put the link on the website. I think that's how you found us. So you must have the link to the Alliance, but we'll put a link for you to join as a member and contribute in any way that you can. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, Eileen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. Really good. I just real quick, I had a very close friend years ago who 10 years ago and I was already clean and sober for a number of years, and he just couldn't do it. And he found out about some study where he could volunteer and do, I'm 99% sure it must have been naltrexone, but it was a while ago. And I remember he came to me one night. I was at work, and he said, I went to the bar and I had 2 drinks and I didn't want any more. And he was like so excited. And of course, whoever did the study, it was a medical study. He was just so wanting to be able to do that. And they did nothing else around nutrition, to say the least. And, like within a year and a half, he was actually, found like dead alone on the funky houseboat that he lived in.
Oh,
So, the kind of studies they do, it's like there's nothing going on with even food or vitamins, let alone amino acid therapy. I'm curious to know, like, who do your typical clients who come to you tend to be? I mean, they can be all over the map, but do they tend to be like executives who don't want to not be able to drink, at functions? Or I'm just kind of curious.
they're just about anyone. I have a warehouse worker that works in my town, a young girl. She was referred by another client, teachers, executive entrepreneurs. I have someone that's a probation officer, a nun, a business owner, sometimes very successful. Often it'll be the wife of someone who's affluent, from finance people in New York City all the way to Oregon. So and sometimes it's a retired investor. I have a lot of retired people that come, and they've been very successful in their careers, and now the partying in Arizona is kind of getting out of hand. I had one person who had a wine cellar of almost $500,000 worth of wine. He's not going to quit drinking. It's an investment for someone at that level, and you don't pour it down the drain, and you can't resell alcohol. So, if it's sort of an inheritance sort of thing. So, and it's a pleasure that he would have with his friends that he would bond with. So there are sometimes other reasons, unforeseen reasons. And of course, when I was working in the abstinence-based, side of things, having someone with that kind of cellar, well, they'd have to get rid of it and they'd have to stop seeing their friends and, or not drink while everyone ends drinking their fancy wine from all over the world. And it just wasn't something he wanted to do. And so he was able to moderate and find a middle ground on that. So it's typically anybody. Yeah. And nurses, I have a nurse practitioner. Gosh, I've had lawyers, all sorts of folks that just mostly come and say it's getting out of hand.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're
And you
not
work
willing to
with
put a
people
label. Yeah.
in person and online?
No, I work strictly online now. I used to be in
Oh,
person,
okay.
but in the last 9 years, it's all online.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
All right, guys, it's a little after 3. If there are no other pressing questions, I will say thank you again to Michele, and do consider joining the board as Michele was nominating you. So thank you, and really excellent presentation, as someone also said in the chat.
Great.
All
Nice,
right,
nice.
guys, thanks. See everyone next month. Jeff, who works with Michele, or is going to speak next month. So please join us for whole family recovery.
Yeah,
Right. Thanks.
I'm
Have a
excited
great
to hear
week.
that. Thank you. Nice to see everyone again. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.